Hello guys, good morning. Today is Thursday. So, kahapon po nagkaroon ng kaguluhan sa bansang Nepal at medyo nagkaroon sila ng violent yung pagrarally na nauwi sa sunugan, sa pananakit, kung ano-ano pa pong naganap kahapon. So, ngayon po ipapakita po ako sa inyo, papanood na video na nangyari kahapon.
Look carefully at the guy in the green. Hit at speed, but then gets himself up. At least 20 people have now been killed in anti-corruption clashes in Nepal, with hundreds more injured.
Corruption! We are fighting against corruption! This is the motto of our protest, fighting against corruption!
High-velocity water cannon and tear gas were the weapons of choice for police against what organisers have dubbed the Gen Z protests. So how did this all start? Young people have been taking to the streets to rally against a government social media ban that saw the likes of Insta, X and TikTok taken away. This came after a Nepo Kid campaign put the spotlight on the lavish lifestyles of the children of politicians. But the problems run deeper. Youth unemployment is high across Nepal and claims of government corruption are rife.
All the Nepalese citizens are fed up of corruption. Every youth are going outside the country, so we want to protect our youth and make the country's economy better. For that, we need a new youth, new power and new politicians who are well educated to move the country forward.
Under pressure, the government lifted the ban and the Prime Minister has now resigned. They had said after an emergency meeting on Monday that they made decisions to address the demands of Gen Z. But the government had justified the ban by saying they wanted to tackle fake news, hate speech and online fraud, an argument young protesters just weren't buying.
Our demand and desire is for peace and to end corruption so that people can actually work and live back in the country. We will work to continue pressure on the government.
The clashes haven't stopped. Kathmandu's international airport suspended flights and the former Prime Minister's residence has been ransacked by protesters. But with the indefinite curfew seemingly being ignored and protests spreading to other regions, anger towards the government shows no signs of letting up.
Well, we're joined now by Nayana Prakash, who is a research fellow at Chatham House. Thank you so much for joining us. I just wanted to start by asking, what's your reaction to what we're seeing in Nepal?
As much as it may seem that these protests have come seemingly overnight with very little provocation, the idea of, the frustration with corruption in the current and, the former government has been there for quite some time. And the social media ban is only the kind of the straw that's broken the camel's back in this instance.
What did the government say? What was their reasoning behind the social media ban in the first place?
So social media bans like this typically happen when the government wants social media companies to comply with governmental norms and the way of doing things in that particular country. It's not unusual in South Asia. We've seen that happen in India, obviously in Nepal's neighboring country, obviously China not far away as well. So social media companies simply had to register with the Nepalese government in order to continue doing business in that country. Many of them failed to do so and were thus banned, which triggered protests which were sparked by but not limited to social media.
And what are the protesters saying in general, and what do they want?
So there's quite a variety of responses from the typically young protesters on the streets in Nepal. We're seeing that a lot of them refer to themselves as being Gen Z, as being youth protesters, many of them in their 20s or younger. They referred to frustration with the corruption of the government. They referred to frustration with the fact that obviously many social media platforms are used for employment purposes and commercial purposes, as well as being tools for keeping in touch with friends. There's also a frustration with the tiered society in in Nepal. And what's a hashtag that's been kind of prominent in this is hashtag Nepo Kid or hashtag Nepo Baby, which is a reference to the idea that the prime minister's children or the children of ministers often enjoy a much more privileged lifestyle than many people do in Nepal, especially with unemployment rates rising, with tourism in decline. The protests kind of amass a great deal of frustrations with the way things are in Nepal. And social media is the tool and the vector through which a lot of young people have understood how different life can be both in Nepal and outside.
And it's a way for them to vent their frustrations and to see what's going on in the world. And they see that as being taken away by the government. Do you think that that is why they've reacted so strongly?
Yeah, I think that there's been a sort of trivializing of what social media can mean to young people, both in this protest and across the world, in that, you know, social media isn't just a way that we chat to our friends, etc. It's a way that we feel connected to any kind of networked society, both locally and globally. And it's also kind of plays a role of citizen journalism. And we've seen that with protests over the years in various contexts, whether it's Black Lives Matter in the US, whether what's happening in Gaza and Palestine. It's a way for people to understand what's going on in other parts of the world. And I think when that tool is taken away, we should see it as a clampdown on freedom of speech and a form of censorship. And I think the young people in Nepal have been quick to react to this because Nepal is historically a country that's allowed some kind of greater level of freedom of speech than some of its neighbors. And so I think that the protest by young people reflects the importance of social media and the role it stands in our society, not just in Nepal, but across the world.
For those who might not know, what is media regulation generally like in Nepal? Is it because there's actually been quite a broad acceptance of different voices, or is it quite narrow and clamped down? I just wonder why young people have reacted in this way.
Yeah, it's historically a more democratic country than, as I say, some of its neighbors. There's not been a massive clampdown on social media platforms before. You know, arguably freedom of speech is more highly tolerated in Nepal than in India or in Pakistan or in Bangladesh, which are some of the countries that it's close to and often compared to. And yet at the same time, it is necessarily influenced by its proximity to these neighbors. And certainly India's relationship with social media companies and the clampdown that it's put social media companies under is a really important comparison, and may indeed have been some of the points of comparison that the Nepalese government drew from when they created this new method of registering social media companies.
What we're seeing today is protests continuing. The Prime Minister might have stepped down, but that hasn't seemed to stop young people going forward and protesting. I wonder, where do you see this ending?
Well, I think, you know, tech companies are back. These social media platforms are back online. The Prime Minister has resigned. But as I said, this isn't just a frustration with one single Prime Minister. It's perhaps a frustration with government writ large. And some of these protesters are protesting for things that don't have easy solutions. Like I said, you know, more jobs or like rising unemployment rates. These aren't things that can be sorted out overnight. And I think there's also very much a frustration and an anger at the speed with which the government took to putting the army on the streets. And I think the violence and bloodshed is really significant and something that we should bear in mind. I think protesters who were angry before are likely to be even angrier, even more upset with the government, which clearly, you know, has clearly created a separation between the civilians and the government. And I think that we're likely to see, if not more bloodshed, at least more frustration, more anger, more protests. And this has just kind of been, you know, the dams are open now, I think. I think
just one more point I wanted to add. You mentioned other countries like India and Pakistan. Do you see this Gen Z protest almost spreading to other countries in the area? Would that be a possibility?
Well, I think it's difficult to compare with India, which is a much larger country, and also the government enjoys a level of support that this government in Nepal did not necessarily have. The Indian government's much more familiar with clamping down on protest as well, and in the light of recent events with Pakistan, has got a popularity boost basically. But I think on a more regional level, in states, we've seen other major protests in India as well, and I think there's no reason why this kind of protest shouldn't be seen in other post-colonial countries outside of South Asia, or indeed in other countries through the world, because this form of Gen Z youth protest is something that I think has become very normal in the last decade, and is something that we'll definitely see more of.
So, ayan po, parang pinili guys yung nangyari kahapon. And sana po, huwag tayo humantong sa ganoon sitwasyon. Sana po, huwag po kayo magpadala sa mga sumususog, nanunusog, o humimok at nananawagan na pumunta kayo sa EDSA at mag-aral. Isipin nyo guys yung buhay ninyo na hindi sila ang masasaktan, itong mga tao, itong nananawagan ng mga pagrarally. Hindi sila ang masasaktan kundi kayo. Dahil kayo ang ibinabala dyan para gumawa ng karahasan, gumawa ng rally. Hindi po yan masusolve sa mga ganyang panawagan. So, kailangan po natin magtiwala tayo sa mga taong nag-iimbestiga ngayon at gumagawa ng talagang totoong investigation para po hindi tayo humantong dyan sa ganyang kaguluhan. Idaan po natin sa tamang proseso at intindihin natin ang ating mga pamilya at ating buhay. Hindi natin kailangan humantong sa ganyang karahasan at huwag po kayong magpapapaniwala sa mga tumatawag ng mga pagrarally. Huwag niyo po silang intindihin. Deadline nyo lang po sila. Ang intindihin natin yung ating sariling buhay. Dahil hindi nila tayo sasagutin. Hindi sila ang nagbibigay sa atin ng ating pang-araw-araw na kailangan. Hindi sila ang nagbibigay, sumusuporta sa ating mga kakainin at ipapakain sa ating mga anak, sa ating mga apo. So, sana po, calm lang po tayo. Huwag po tayo magpadala sa kanila. Huwag po natin intindihin ang kanilang mga panawagan. So, yun lang guys. Magdasal na po tayo. Kaya tayo. Yun lang guys. Salamat po.
In my loving arms you'll find a place to rest, a peace.